I live in Ward 11, and I'm not in favor of this proposal. I feel the site selection and the community notification was deeply flawed, and judging on the agenda item for number 16, I'm not so sure it's to be rectified anytime soon. I've always thought that municipal politics in the city was progressive and inclusive, where all citizens had an equal opportunity to have their voices heard when it comes to city matters. But in recent weeks, and currently during this meeting, it's become clear that some voices have more opportunity to be heard than others.
You can have a level playing field, you know. Stunts like today, for example, where you say, okay, guys, prepare 5 minutes, and then we get here and you have 3 minutes. That's not a level playing field. That's not a roundtable discussion. That's a hierarchical discussion. And I think that's what a lot of these people behind me are a little bit bitter about, frankly.
As the news of the city's plan to turn the former Goodwill store at 731 Runnymede into a 100-bed men's shelter began to trickle down through our community, I became increasingly disappointed with the limited information provided by the city and lack of accountability in the documents circulated to the residents. Specifically, responses to questions like, will clients be screened for prior convictions, including sexual assault? Are clients coming from Seton House? Has City Council ever voted against a staff-recommended shelter? Were particularly offensive, as they were extremely dismissive of some very legitimate questions. Notably, many in our community that live a block south of the Goodwill site in Ward 13 received no information on the proposal or the planned information session, despite living well within the 250-meter distance. On top of that, the information provided was in English only, which is the mother tongue of only 46% of the people in our ward, a point that was hammered home to me this week, as I canvassed a number of homes within the 250-meter radius, and many of my neighbors still had no idea. As part of the Toronto Strong Neighborhood Strategy 2020, the plan for activating change involves activating people, activating resources, and activating neighborhood-friendly policies. At the heart of these is ensuring that residents are at the core of the decisions that impact their lives and their community. It's become clear to me that our ability to provide input and make decisions is solely at the discretion of the city and is limited to splash pads and community gardens.
Did they answer all the questions?
No, they didn't. It was very, similarly with your documents about how to engage the public, you eliminated a whole range of concerns that people have beforehand. You get straight to the facts of the site and what you're going to do with it. And that's not why people showed up. They want to understand, if you put this there, what's going to happen. Sure, some of their concerns perhaps may be a little bit unfounded, but I think they certainly demand answers. And we didn't get those at any of the meetings.
Thank you.
Just very briefly, my notes indicate that there were community consultations on May the 31st, June the 9th, and June the 13th.
That's correct.
Making this technically the fourth chance for the...
You can have a meeting, but if you don't answer any of the questions, you might as well not bother.
Do you think there's a democratic deficit? This is...
I absolutely do, and I think that your policies for how to inform the public are talking about how to hold a meeting and having a greeter at the door, and your answers are weak. If I was in the public sector and was able to give some of the answers that were provided to me, I'd be fired.
So it's not the volume of the number of meetings, it's the content of the meetings. Okay, fair enough.
And some of the best practices that had been introduced there actually from motions by councillors at that time, an economic development strategy, youth workers, community health officer, building inspections, a number of things that were added on. Have you had a chance to look at those at all?
I don't think it's my duty to do that. I think that's the duty of the city to bring that forth to me as a resident. I don't think I need to do that.
Given that you're here now, and I'm just asking
Yeah.
if anybody directed you to some of those?
No.
Or you've had a chance to look at the Cornerstone Shelter or the Hope Shelter and some of the many additions that were added for the community development side.
Nobody brought that forward at all.
Thank you.
I just want to address the issue of our staff. And I hear you, and I was at one of the meetings around the staff presentation and certainly your feelings. Would you also acknowledge that during the first two meetings, the staff didn't even make it through their presentation before they were frankly shut down? In other words, it kind of... It's a bit of a two-way thing here going.
Well, there is a two-way thing, but what I feel is that people were frustrated because the communication they were receiving wasn't actually relevant or respectful. And yes, it's a very frustrating and pressured position to be in, to try to launch something like this. And I really think that the city could have done a lot better. And if you want to talk about
Do you
good
think the
PR, then this
My
was
question
bad
is,
PR.
do you think the community could have done better?
No,
listening
I think
to
that's unfair to say. I think that's really unfair to say, because you did a shock and awe campaign. It was divisive politics. You dropped a bomb and said, this is going to happen. Right before the meeting that I went to with Francis Nunziata, Councillor Doucette is quoted on TV saying, and again, I appreciate the media, they can do little splices, but she's quoted in the media saying, the
City
city...
doesn't come to residents and say, do you want this? They say, this is going in.
And if we asked everybody where the shelters and homeless should go, nobody would take them. That is offensive. That is bullying. It is not transparency. It is not collaborative. And if you ask me where the homeless should go, by all means, you can go rent a house next to me. You can, there's houses for sale on my street. Buy one. Make it into compartments.
You
Put
think it's
20
bullying?
homeless men there and give them a home.
Do you think it's bullying that, that I could buy a house next to you and I don't have to ask you and...
No, you can buy a house.
consult
We're not
you,
talking about buying a house. We're talking about stacking 100 men in a warehouse. That's not the same.
But you know
You're
that
comparing
actually
apples
what-
and oranges.
in
and the
terms of
philosophy doesn't
actual-
work.
In terms of actual fact, it is true that the city has the authority.
It does, and it's a really
a fact.
draconian
It's not-
type of thing.
It's not something that goes to community consultation.
That's right, it doesn't, and that's a
correct.
really big process. It's a problem.
Okay, thank you.
I'm a Rockcliffe Smythe resident and social worker. I work in the community with people experiencing mental health addiction issues, many who are experiencing homelessness, and I also work in a shelter. I have a vested interest in Rockcliffe Smythe as a community and the well-being of marginalized people to whom the city plans on providing emergency shelter. I have been to all 3 information meetings, and my concerns have been consistent. The vulnerability of the neighborhood, the lack of services in the area of the proposed shelter site, and the misinformation provided by the city.
What services do you feel, Mr. Tanner, the area around 731 Runnymede Road has to offer? And I live 3 blocks away. Thank you.
So thanks for your question. With respect to the 100-bed shelter that's proposed for 731 Runnymede Road, as I mentioned, the services that were provided there will not be the intense kind of supports that the doctors are referring to in the letter that you made reference to. The supports in the local neighborhood with respect to partnerships that we will build on and develop with service providers already in wards 11 and 13 includes such places as Sunwater Neighborhood Center, Unison Community Health Center, Four Villages Community Health Center. The issue there is actually Community Health Center do have a specific fund from the province that provides health care for homeless people, and that's in every community health center. So I do understand that there are challenges getting doctors in this community. I'm not trying to dispute that at all. There is special funding that goes to the CHCs to provide access to health care for people who are on the street and homeless. So those are a few. Some of those would be accessed by transit. They're not all walking distance. Folks that come into our shelter system, we're trying to get back into housing. People need to know how to use the transit system. We provide a lot of tokens to people to get to services all over services in the community.
So the map that was at the last meeting, the one that showed our services available in Ward 11, is it somewhere on that wall?
Yes, I'm saying yes, I'm assuming it is, yes.
I just want to know if it's on that wall. That's all I want to know.
Emily, yes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I see the map was created by SSHA in April 2016. Was it created for this specific project?
We have a database of all of our funded programs. It's a matter of printing out a report and it populates it on a map.
Okay, but you didn't actually survey the neighborhood yourselves.
Excuse me, we fund services in every community across Toronto. We have staff on the ground at each one of those agencies that actually receive funding, just so we're clear.
SSHA representatives provided a map of social services in Ward 11. The maps provided by SSHA included many non-existent and irrelevant resources. These included addresses of single homes and an empty field. I do have some concerns about the map. First, there are a few addresses that I'm particularly confused about. The map lists 5 Foxwell Ave, which is a single home that just sold for $720,000. The next is 29 Cynthia Road, which is a home at the end of a dead-end street. Then there's 1570 Jane Street, which is a low-rise apartment building. And most confusing is 301 Rockcliffe Boulevard, which is just an empty field. I have pictures of these for your reference. How do these addresses elementary schools and daycares, city-owned multi-purpose rooms, co-op housing, and resources that are actually downtown. Their map was almost completely wrong. Considering all of the inconsistencies in the map you provided the public and possibly used to assess the services in the area and false information, I do have to ask, is SSHA deliberately misleading the public, or is there some sort of incompetence in the department? Rockcliffe community or homeless men any reassurance that you've done your due diligence in considering their needs and selecting an appropriate shelter site? Or were you hoping that the working class neighborhood with low education rates weren't going to notice? Perhaps the most concerning was the misplacement of the Syme-Woolner Neighborhood Association, which is a service that does specifically address the needs of people experiencing homelessness. Gordon Tanner referenced this exact service as a resource the shelter would use and spoke about it as if it was housed in Rockcliffe Smythe just minutes before I spoke to the discrepancies found in the map. The Syme-Woolner Neighborhood Association is actually at Eglinton in Caledonia, a 1-hour walk away from the proposed shelter site. These mistakes are not acceptable and made me further concerned about the competencies within SSHA to use best practices to pick appropriate shelter sites and the possibility of willfully misleading the public. Why were you misleading the public?
So this is the third time we've come and asked all a series of questions at each of the 3 meetings that we've had. What I'd like to do is really thank you because you've done a lot of them, and you have. And it's absolutely... You have done a lot of research, and that's very helpful for us. However, the answer to your question, though, is we have done our due diligence. We know that the services that do exist. We made it on that map. My apologies, and we will have to let you apologize to the homeless.
The maps should have been corrected by now, and they were never corrected, even though we pointed it out. The councillors pointed it out, and the community pointed it out. So why did we never correct those maps?
So with all due respect, I want to suggest that the way the meetings unfolded, it wasn't actually to the third meeting that staff were actually able to get through the entire package of information, given the reaction from staff. And I think that speaks to the format of the meetings, but there was not a dialogue, I would say a constructive dialogue that would have allowed us to have that kind of discussion.
The second meeting, the staff did complete their full presentation. You can ask Costanza, she was there. They was completed. Absolutely was completed. We waited to the very end.
So many people mentioned the map and having things wrong on it. What's with the map that we're hearing about today?
We developed that map through a combination of the city's open data website, research that our staff do, and I think there were a couple sites, locations on that map that were not accurate, and I apologize for that, but I would say the most of the information, the bulk of it was actually quite accurate.
So there were some mistakes when it was presented to the public. So does it surprise you that they were concerned about that?
No, it doesn't surprise me.
Doesn't surprise you, okay.
Nobody knows the community better than people that are living in the community, right? So why not use the community as a tool to help inform in the creation of a new shelter? Wouldn't it benefit the staff and the city that if we worked with the community before we bring forward a proposal on a shelter and on a site? That would help the process, would it not?
Let me be the first to say, and I think our report 16 starts to address this, that we're very open to trying to improve the process so we can have that dialogue early on. There is an inherent conflict or a challenge in the municipal shelter bylaw. We've been directed by council to find shelter locations across the city because council has decided in its wisdom as far back as 2003 that shelters are as of right in any part of the city. Then of course we want to find a site that's suitable. But The bylaw, the way it's written, it describes how far away we notify people. It talks about that we would have an information meeting. Anything else we would create, we need to actually build a process. And let me be the first to say that I believe that we should be working on a more robust process. And one of the reasons we need to do that is because over the last few years, we're starting now to go into parts of the city that have not had shelters.
Would you not think that it's a good idea to ask Torontonians, so where do you think, what are some good locations when you put the criteria down, we'd like the transit, we'd like this and that we could ask those members of those communities to start looking at where would be a good location for shelter?
I would be open to that.
Do you have a service inventory around the sites that you're looking at?
So there's a set number of criteria, for example, that it has to be on TTC or public transit, it has to be on a major road, it has to be 250 meters from the closest shelter, it has to be AODA compliant. Then we actually scour through the city again for the various items, and then we talk to landlords in general, and are landlords willing to consider the sites for that purpose? In our discovery, most of them would say no to us. In this case, it was about 90% of them said no to us, and only a few that really said yes. And then based on those additional filter criteria, that's when we find 1 or 2 sites at best.
And many landlords said no. Many landlords said no. Well, I think that has to be changed. A landlord can't say no because you're black. A landlord can't say no because you're an Aboriginal person. A landlord can't say no for those reasons. That's against the Human Rights Code. And we've been to the Human Rights Commission a number of times to say you can't have that beside you because you don't like that.
In September 1999, the City of Toronto entered into a 5-year lease for the 1673 Kingston Road building that was a nursing home and for a rent of $24,000 a month. After the lease expired, over the last 11 years, we have met with the city on numerous occasions to renegotiate a new lease and have been given the runaround. Repairs and maintenance has been an ongoing concern between the city and myself. The lease specifies that the city is responsible for the interior of the building. The city has never had proper maintenance staff to tend to the daily, weekly and monthly upkeep of the buildings. I have continuously been called for repairs for flooring, bathrooms, painting, locks, hinges, push-out bars. These are what a maintenance person should be doing, and the city has not had someone there. They had a cleaner, and at times the place wasn't well clean. I've spent over $200,000 in doing repairs. The city has put in on the roof, through a Skippy grant, they removed their air condition from in the basement and put it on the roof. The architect and engineer said that is the reason a number of leaking problems, because you don't put a new big air conditioner on an old roof which is continually giving problem. However, it's been fixed.
It is in a deteriorating condition on the inside and really does not meet the needs of the residents in there. Would you agree to that it's in pretty rough shape?
Well, as I mentioned here, a building needs to be maintained. In that, you need to, if a piece of the wall is kicked in by a resident or something, you need to plaster it, yes, and you need to paint it. It needs to be maintained. You just cannot leave it there to deteriorate.
Are you then suggesting that that was the city's responsibility and not your responsibility?
It was the city's responsibility.
So the deterioration that we've heard that has been spoken about, did the city have a maintenance person, for example?
No. No.
Was there a company contracted?
No.
So how was the maintenance done?
They would call somebody outside of somebody, they'd call a contractor from outside, like, a simple thing like a toilet handle that broke, that they will call somebody outside the contractor to fix it.
How large is your building?
The building?
Yes.
22,000 square feet.
Right. And what was your rent that you collected on
$24,000.
24,000.
And this is since 1999. They have not given an increase.
I'm sorry,
Since 1999, when the city commenced leasing the building, the same rent remains, even though we've,
To current day 2000?
the current date.
The city fails in terms of an adequate, thorough, honest process. And at the end of the day, we just have to clearly do better by our communities, but most importantly, by the people who are going to be living in these buildings and these shelters than we have done historically. My hope is that we would need 0 homeless shelters. I think that's all what we'd like, but the reality is we do need them. And we will need many of them, and we will need many of them in, I think, virtually every neighborhood in Toronto. And we can't keep going through this if we know that's going to happen. It's just not productive, and it doesn't accomplish any of our goals. The siting of shelters seems to me to be driven solely by a real estate opportunity. And I don't think that is enough of a criteria. Now, I don't know what the criteria should be. I think access by transit is important, and other services around, and not a list of services that is so hard to ever achieve that you can never cite a shelter. But I just think that it's being driven too much by real estate from 2 perspectives. Shelters are being driven out of neighborhoods because the price of real estate goes up, a condo goes up, and then they've lost their home, and then when they have to find a new place, it's often just driven by what building's available. And I asked the question when I heard it was a Goodwill site. Well, there's a Goodwill site vacant on St. Clair Christie that is on great transit, has great services, is a community that was telling us 2 years ago that they were welcoming of a shelter, and then I have to wonder why that building wasn't pursued, and my guess is because it's a more expensive real estate transaction. At the end of the day, we may end up spending so much on this shelter to make it palatable to the community that cost may be about the same anyways. So I think we have to come up with a stronger set of criteria of why we cite these, and clearly it's been said over and over, and we can't keep going through this. While it's always going to be difficult, we need to improve the process dramatically. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It sounds very similar every time. I hear people who are upset with process, where the consultation wasn't rigorous enough. And I think that's a product of 2 things. I think we, in one part, are scared to go out and have this conversation because of the reaction. And so maybe there's even though we don't know we're doing it as a city, that we reluctantly engage in it, and so maybe we don't engage as a robust way as we could and should. I also think part of it is that we're maybe not being completely honest with residents about this process. And maybe it's information that is all that we can provide, and it's not consultation, because as Councillor Mihevc said, every single relocation has been approved by council. But even the way we conduct a meeting, I think totally can taint or color how residents respond to these new neighbors moving into their neighborhood. Even the way our notices go out. I'm not sure why we repeat the same mistakes and inevitably put everything on a bad footing. If our end goal is for us to want these shelters to succeed, then I don't know why we would invest so little time into the way we inform people and welcome new neighbors into a part of the city. I think if we're again honest, the only criteria is finding a building that's zoned, and there's a real estate transaction that makes sense for the provider in the city. I don't think there are any other criteria. We should have a debate as whether there should be, and I think that debate should be informed and focused by the fact, what will make this shelter succeed? Not focused on the negatives in the community, but are there services and supports? Well, that's a good thing. That would be a good location. And again, to sound a bit like a broken record, when this comes up again, and I'm thankful to the chair for giving me a little extra time here, we know there's going to be relocations. We're going to have this exact same meeting at this committee before the midterm of this term, I'm sure of it.